I had always thought of myself as someone who could handle being alone. My husband's job often took him away for days, sometimes weeks, and I told myself it was just part of life. But this time, his absence felt heavier, more suffocating than usual. I couldn't shake the hollow feeling that lingered in the quiet corners of the house. The sound of his voice, the warmth of his presence, it was all missing, leaving a void I couldn't ignore. Our dog, Max, was my only companion. A golden retriever with soft, expressive eyes, he seemed to sense every emotion that passed through me. He wasn't just a pet, he was family. Whenever my husband was away, Max had an uncanny way of stepping into the role of a quiet protector, offering his silent, yet steady comfort. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of gold and pink, I sat on the couch, staring at the empty spot where my husband would usually sit. Max jumped up beside me, resting his head on my lap. I absent-mindedly stroked his fur, my thoughts spiraling into the what-ifs and could-have-beens. "Do you ever miss him as much as I do?" I whispered to Max, half laughing at myself for expecting an answer. But the way he looked up at me, his gaze so understanding, it was almost as if he did. The days began to blend together. I tried keeping myself busy, reading, cleaning, even trying my hand at baking, but nothing filled the emptiness. Max, however, was a constant. Every morning, he'd nudge me awake, and every evening, he'd curl up by my feet as I worked my way through yet another book. He was more attentive than ever, his presence anchoring me when I felt like drifting away. It was during one of our morning walks that I noticed something strange. As we strolled through the park, Max stopped suddenly, turning back to look at me. His eyes seemed to say, "Keep going. Don't stop here." I laughed at the absurdity of it, but followed his lead anyway. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small spark of purpose. That night, I decided to do something different. Instead of retreating to my usual spot on the couch, I brought out an old photo album. As I flipped through the pages, memories of happier times flooded back. Max sat beside me, his head resting on my arm as if sharing in the nostalgia. Something shifted in me. I realized how much I had been holding back, how much I had let the silence consume me. My connection with Max had been my lifeline, but it also made me confront a painful truth. I was lonely not just because my husband was away, but because I had been pulling away emotionally even when he was home. Max let out a soft whimper, breaking me out of my thoughts. "You're right," I murmured, scratching behind his ears. "It's time to face it." The days turned into a rhythm that was both comforting and strange. Max had become my closest confidant, the one I relied on when my emotions threatened to overwhelm me. Each morning began with him nudging me out of bed, his enthusiasm infectious as he wagged his tail and urged me outside. Our walks became a ritual, something I looked forward to as much as he did. I started talking to Max during those walks. At first, it felt silly, chatting with a dog as though he could respond. But the more I spoke, the lighter I felt. He would look up at me with those warm, understanding eyes, and somehow it felt like he was listening. I found myself opening up about things I hadn't even admitted to myself. My fears, my frustrations, and even the doubts I had about my marriage, all poured out during those quiet moments in the park or along the winding trails. Max seemed to thrive on the attention. He would bark playfully, nudge me when I got too lost in my thoughts, or sit patiently by my side when I needed a moment to collect myself. His presence became more than just a comfort. It was a reminder that I wasn't as alone as I felt. One evening, as I sat in the kitchen sipping tea, I found myself watching Max intently. He was sprawled out on the floor, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. I wondered how it was possible for a dog to bring so much peace into my life. It wasn't just his loyalty, it was his ability to sense what I needed before I even knew it myself. I started noticing things I'd overlooked before. The way he would position himself between me and the door, as if to protect me. How he would fetch my favorite blanket on chilly nights without being asked. Even his insistence on sitting beside me, leaning his weight against me just enough to let me know he was there. The connection between us grew deeper with each passing day. He was no longer just a dog in my eyes. He was a companion who understood me in ways I couldn't explain. I began to realize that Max wasn't just filling the void left by my husband's absence. He was helping me confront the emotions I had buried for so long. Yet, the more I leaned on Max, the more conflicted I felt. A part of me worried that I was using him as a substitute for something that couldn't be replaced. But another part of me was grateful for the way he made me laugh, for the moments of joy he brought into my days, and for the unconditional love he offered without question or hesitation. As I watched him wag his tail and rest his head on my lap, I realized just how much Max had become a part of my healing. He was teaching me something I hadn't expected, that love, in all its forms, could be found in the simplest of connections. One night, as I sat by the window staring into the quiet darkness, a thought crept into my mind that I couldn't shake. Was this bond with Max filling a void that I should have been addressing elsewhere? It wasn't a question I wanted to face, but the silence of the house made it impossible to ignore. I looked at Max, who was curled up beside me, and felt a wave of guilt. He was there for me in every way that mattered, but I couldn't help but wonder if I had allowed myself to rely on him too much. I thought about my husband, about the distance that had grown between us, not just physically but emotionally. His job had always been demanding, and I had accepted it as part of our life together. But somewhere along the way, I had stopped reaching out, stopped trying to bridge the gap. It wasn't just his absence that had created this loneliness, it was my unwillingness to admit how much it hurt. Max shifted beside me, his head resting on my leg as though sensing my inner turmoil. I ran my fingers through his fur, seeking comfort in the familiar. That's when I noticed something unusual. Tucked beneath his collar was a folded piece of paper. My heart raced as I pulled it out, unfolding it carefully. It was a note from my husband. The handwriting was unmistakably his, and the words stopped me in my tracks. I know I've been away more than I should, and I know it's not fair to you. But I want you to know how much I love you, how much I miss you every single day. Max has been my way of staying connected to you when I can't be there myself. Take care of him, and let him take care of you. I'll be home soon. Tears welled up in my eyes as I read the note over and over again. All this time, I had been so consumed by my loneliness that I hadn't considered what my husband might be feeling. He wasn't just absent. He was carrying his own guilt, his own longing to be with me. Max nudged my hand, pulling me out of my thoughts. It hit me then. This bond one had formed with Max wasn't just about filling a void. It was a bridge, a way of staying connected to my husband even when he wasn't physically present. Every walk, every shared moment with Max had been a silent reminder of the love my husband and I shared, even if I hadn't realized it at the time. The guilt I felt began to transform into something else, hope. Hope that things could change, that I could find a way to rebuild the connection I thought I had lost. Max had shown me that love doesn't always come in the ways we expect, but it's always there, waiting to be acknowledged. The moment my husband walked through the door, I knew things had to change. He looked exhausted, his shoulders heavy with the weight of weeks away from home. But when he smiled at me, there was a warmth in his eyes that reminded me why I had fallen in love with him in the first place. Max barked excitedly, rushing to greet him, his tail wagging furiously. For the first time in weeks, the house felt alive. I didn't wait for him to settle in. I couldn't. The note I had found burned in my pocket, a constant reminder of the things I needed to say. "We need to talk," I blurted out, my voice trembling slightly. He looked at me, surprised but not resistant, and nodded. We sat down, and I let everything spill out, the loneliness, the frustration, and the doubts I had been carrying. I told him how Max had become my confidant, how his presence had helped me cope, and how finding the note had opened my eyes to things I hadn't wanted to admit. I didn't realize how much I was holding back, I confessed, my voice breaking. "I thought I was angry at you for being away, but the truth is, I was scared. Scared that we were drifting apart." He listened quietly, his expression a mixture of guilt and understanding. When I finished, he reached for my hand. "I've felt it too," he admitted. "Every time I leave, I wonder if it's worth it. If I'm losing you little by little, because I'm not here when you need me." His honesty was like a balm to my aching heart. For so long, I had convinced myself that the distance between us was something I had to endure, but hearing him voice his fears made me realize we had both been struggling in silence. We talked for hours, more openly than we had in years. We made promises, not the kind that are easily forgotten, but ones that came from a place of genuine intention. He would make an effort to be more present, and I would work on sharing my feelings instead of burying them. Max sat between us the entire time, his head resting on my husband's knee as though he understood the importance of the moment. I couldn't help but smile at how much he had done for us without even knowing it. That night, as we sat together with Max curled up at our feet, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in a long time. The house no longer felt empty, and neither did I. Max had been the glue that held me together when I was falling apart, and now he was the bridge that brought us back to each other. In the days that followed, things began to shift. We spent more time as a family, taking Max on walks together and rediscovering the joy in simple moments. The bond one had formed with Max didn't fade. It deepened as he became a reminder of how love, in all its forms, has the power to heal and bring us closer.